think when things are going smooth, you don't think a lot about God, but when you have a bad sickness or emergencies or something like that, you say, wow, there is God, and He's there.
I went in the hospital first part of November, and I remember Christmas. That's the first thing I remember. And I was in intensive care, and I couldn't speak, I couldn't sit up or anything. But people kept coming into my room and telling me what a miracle I was. And I didn't know what they were talking about. I think that the miracle was for the benefit of other people, my family, my friends, people who came to visit, maybe nurses and doctors, because I wasn't even conscious. I had no idea what had happened. It's been 11 hard years for our family, but God always shows up. He always shows up. One thing I've learned in all this is that intercessory prayer works.
At the whole time, people supporting us all the way through this crisis. But during that time, I really became closer to God. I mean, I really did. But I always see this picture of Jesus, His arms around these surgeons, and that's exactly how I felt during this whole time. All these doctors were just sort of instruments of Jesus.
We felt like we encountered God when our daughter Audrey was born.
They do the heartbeat every time you go in to have an appointment. And the heartbeat was fine and then dropped way down. I'm having a C-section right now.
We're going now.
I could not form words. I said at one point, right when they said you're coming in, and I said, call Amy Heater! And that's all I could do. And Amy prayed with us on the phone.
A big shock. We were there for a doctor's appointment.
Yeah.
Checkup. And here we are going in for a C-section. And so we did. Nobody's there with us because this was totally freak thing.
Yeah.
And she's getting gowned up for surgery, and I remember almost panicking. But I felt kind of a hand on my back, almost as support at the moment, because she's really leaning on me. I felt like somebody was with me, helping me then.
She said it was a true knot because she had tied it completely tight. So there was no blood flow, no oxygen, no nothing. So she said, had you have not come in, this circumstance would have been very different. And she's perfect.
Yeah.
But we can only look back on that story and know that God was intertwined in every fiber of that story. There's no other way to explain how she came to us.
That doctor's appointment wasn't a coincidence.
No.
I don't know if I necessarily like that word, encounter, because it sounds like we're doing the finding. Like it's like man, encounter is a word that it's a one-sided. If you found something or you interacted with it, I think it's God interacting with us more than we're the ones interacting with Him.
One of my significant encounters with God that was a real watershed event in my life was my accident in 2005. It's really a story about grace and healing. It's not so much a story about the physical part that went with that, but it's more about how the community at Covenant came around to me. You know, people I didn't even know would show up at our house with food, take me to doctor's appointments, different things like that. What I learned out of all that was God gave me the ability to race a bike again, and just because He loves me. If you get a gift like that and you feel like, oh, now I have to do something with this to pay God back, then it loses its power to transform us because you didn't really accept it just as a free gift, just because God loves you. After my accident, I entered just a really dark time in my life. And I started meeting with a couple people from our church who were part of the Shalom Ministry, just tremendous prayer warriors, and spent a year and a half doing healing prayer with them. And every time we met, God showed up and ministered to me in some kind of way that healed my heart. That was my encounter, an encounter of grace.
I was a new deacon and it was my turn to take a shot at the prayer wall. A family of 3 walked up, a father and a mother and a 12-year-old boy. And the father said, "We just moved here and my son is having a terrible time." He said, "Would you pray with us?" And I said, "Yes." I prayed as best as I could for them, and then they left. And a little bit later on, as I was leaving the sanctuary, the man came hurrying back and he said, "Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you." He says, "I don't know how you were able to say the exact words that our son needed to hear, but," he says, "you did. And I thank you, thank you." And I go, and he walked away. And I thought about that, and it just gave me the shivers, and my knees started to buckle when I realized it was God that was putting those words into my mouth for him. So that's it.
In God's name.
In God's
A few
name.
years back, my mom decided randomly to go to Disneyland. Like, a couple months later, my parents ended up getting a divorce, and it's amazing how God already knows what is good for us before we even know it. And I think that was like just a point in time where He wanted us to be together as a family, one last time. So, I don't know, I think just an encounter with God is, He brings comfort and He shows how He loves us in a way that we can't even understand.
As 2012 has been a real year of tears for Archie and May, and it has been tremendous joy and tremendous sorrow. Am I willing to receive the beauty in the midst of that? And not only grace towards others, but grace towards myself, grace to the consequences and the circumstances that we don't necessarily understand, and receiving that with radical acceptance, saying, "Okay, God, I know you're in the midst of this. I know that there's beauty in this, even though this feels really, really painful. I know you're in the midst of this." And the hope that that gives me, is amazing, that He's in the middle of all of that, even though it doesn't feel good, that I can say, yeah, giving radical acceptance cheerfully and effortlessly, because God is in the midst of the beauty. And what I love is we hardly notice, but beauty is everywhere. And where there is tenderness, care, and kindness, there is beauty. And I would say that everywhere there is tenderness, care, and kindness, there is God. That's what I've learned this year.
For me, encounter has a connotation of momentary and brief, which, rather than thinking that an encounter is just one-sided with God on either encountering us or us encountering God, it sounds to me relational. But if it's momentary, then that kind of takes away from the idea that God is always, He's omnipresent. He's always there, always reaching out to us, always asking for, our obedience and relationship.
In the midst of this whole cancer thing and trying to grappling with it in the beginning, and the sort of the fear that grips you, and the recognition that you can't get away from it, or likely you're not going to get away from it. I just started praying for peace, just a sense of peace. And in the 3.5 years that we've been fighting it, when there would be moments of fear, and the fear of the unknown, the fear of the future and all of that, I would just start praying for God's peace, and without exception, I think. He's granted it. It's just been an amazing experience to, at some points, wake up or get this sense of sort of a panic and fear, and then just ask God for His peace, and He grants it. That's my experience with the God.
I think what I love about covenant is it seems awfully preoccupied with just the two commandments of loving God and loving others. And I think what I love, and it's so refreshing, and it's teaching me so much about covenant, being a part of this body of believers, is when you're so busy focusing on how to be right with God and worship God and loving God and accepting His love, and then showing that and doing love, not just talking about it, but this church is so busy doing love, there's really not a lot of time to be judgmental and critical. And I think with covenant, the DNA is so full of grace and authenticity. It's a lifeline to me, just to have that safe net where you can just be real. Our son died 10 years ago of a virus, and there's nothing we could have done. I know that, but and I think still in my heart, I wonder if I wasn't good enough. Like, why didn't He save our son? Does He not love us? And you just don't feel God's love, and you hear how He heals all these people around, but He didn't heal our son. And I'm learning a new God. I'm learning the truth of God and the grace of God, and I think that's just a lifeline for me that I was about to throw in the towel. Actually, my husband and I were before we joined our church, this church, and I think I just have shriveled up and put on a good game face. But then you become part of this church right when I was about ready to give up, and you have some amazing, intelligent, smart people who are pointing us to God, and it's really helped me save my little shoestring faith. And that little shoestring faith has become stronger in the last year and a half just through the people of covenant, I think, pointing us to God and just loving each other.
An encounter with God is when God is constantly pursuing you, and you realize, when you might not have known it before, that you were a true steward of your time to help nurture.
And I couldn't do this without that community of women that come around and, keep my arms raised when I feel, I want to slide towards despair.
We've talked about leaving Colorado, just wanting to get out of Colorado Springs, because we're not crazy about the city. But we can. Every time it comes down to, it would have to be far enough away that we were really away, and that makes it hard to be part of Covenant. And Covenant is family. We just can't seem to leave it.
I think the common thought with encounter with God is thinking about a direct encounter with God in some sort of spiritual sense. But I think there's more to it than that. I think that's putting God in a box of our limited human experience. And I think there's more to encounters with God that go beyond just even personal encounters, but that a personal encounter can happen within a group or a life event or any sort of experience where maybe not even in the moment you realize God is there, but then later looking back on it, you can see God's handprints all over it.